Okay, shall we go ahead and get started? I'm sure a few other people will join us as well, but I have a few comments to make. Welcome everyone, and please, and thank you for joining Accessibility Audit through
Accessibility templates, how we communicated our findings with vendors, and we'll talk a little bit about what our next steps are for this project. As a brief note, any resources and links that we reference throughout this presentation are available at go.unc.edu/accessaudit, all one word, all lowercase. All right, so where we started, this project was born out of necessity. When COVID-19 hit, a lot of the UNC-Chapel Hill Library employees who predominantly worked in a physical space needed remote tasks. We saw this as an opportunity. We wanted to have these employees perform remote accessibility testing of our subscription e-resources, and we wanted them to do this using freely available digital accessibility evaluation tools. Hopefully throughout this presentation, you'll gain an understanding of our e-resource accessibility audit process. You'll gain further familiarity with the standards, guidelines, and laws related to digital accessibility. And hopefully you'll come away with some strategies to assess and advocate for accessibility with your own e-resource vendors. So I'm going to go through some context and definitions so that we're all on the same page vocabulary-wise. Many of us will be familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is a federal civil rights law, and it prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities. How this comes into the digital space is through Section 508. This is a section of the Federal Rehabilitation Act, which requires federal agencies to use information and communication technology that is accessible to people with disabilities. Since January of 2018, Section 508 has been defined by WCAG 2.0 level accessibility. WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and is a set of standards that define accessibility in digital spaces. When I talk about digital accessibility throughout this presentation, what I'm talking about is optimizing our digital environments to be navigable and accessible to all users regardless of their ability level. In addition, during this presentation, we're going to use the term VPAT, and this stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. These are documents which vendors can complete to assess their product on the standards of WCAG 2.0. So when we started this project, we needed to recruit participants. We got very lucky in that UNC Libraries created a work from home project group, which matched staff who had time for remote work with remote projects. We had a total of 20 project members for this project. These included both staff and student employees. So how we supported the participants in our project was by creating a team site. And this was something that was structured by the work from home project team. So they gave us a template and we filled it out with the details of our project. This allowed us to facilitate conversation and file sharing among project members. It also allowed us to share a project description and the links to our accessibility evaluation surveys through a shared Teams tab. In terms of training and support, we supported our participants through responding to any questions they had in the Teams chat, as well as creating some training materials to help them use the tools we were asking them for. In this, we have linked to a voiceover training video, which was developed by Felicity to show our testers how to use Macintosh voiceover, which is the voiceover that's built into all Apple products. That's the screen reader that's built into all Apple products. So this training video showed testers how to look for readability, alt text on images, formatting of heading, and readable links. In terms of developing the survey, we first needed to identify which databases we were going to select for evaluation. We were unable to get a clear usage data from our resource acquisitions management team because of the way that statistics are recorded. So instead, we went through our LibGuides. All of our databases are listed in LibGuides, and when you sort them, you can sort by the mapping count. And what this means is how many LibGuides this database shows up on. So by mapping count, we were able to identify the databases that our librarians are recommending through their LibGuides most often. So we decided to evaluate the most highly used ones first. We selected our standards based on how easy they would be to evaluate, because we didn't want to ask people to have a plethora of technological knowledge in order to be able to participate in this project. We created the surveys through an institutional Qualtrics subscription, and our results were collected anonymously to avoid giving any specific weight to any specific responses based on a person's role within the organization. Each of our surveys evaluated 8 different resources. Each individual resource was evaluated on 6 different accessibility criteria. So when people accessed the surveys, they selected a resource that they wanted to evaluate, and then they visited both the homepage of that resource and a content page that they discovered through either browsing or searching. Each of these pages was tested for these 6 criteria: keyboard navigation, or the ability to navigate through the website using only your keyboard; focus indicator visibility, or the ability to see what you have selected on the screen; manual resizing. Users should be able to resize content up to 200% of zoom without any problems with the content. They were tested on their compatibility with screen readers, their compliance with color contrast standards, and when available, PDFs were also assessed for accessibility. These results were entered into a Qualtrics survey. So we used a variety of free assessment tools to perform these assessments. We used NVDA, which is my personal favorite screen reader. It is a very lightweight, free screen reader that you can download from NV Access. It's very simple to use, so there was a very low level of training needed for this. We also asked our participants to install a variety of browser extensions. One of these was the Wave Accessibility Checker. This is a browser extension available for both Firefox and Chrome, which allows you to see accessibility errors on a page. You'll see the screenshot on your screen is a screenshot of a Wave Checker result screen. We also asked them to install a color contrast browser extension called the WCAG Color Contrast Checker, which showed us if there was insufficient contrast on the screen. And then we asked them to use the snipping tool or some other screen capture tool that would allow them to capture a portion of their screen as an image and submit that along with their survey results. So by the numbers, about the year this project has been active, our participants have completed 582 surveys, evaluating 80 resources in depth. It's been a very long project, but we are very happy that we've been able to collect so much data on the accessibility of our subscription e-resources.
All right, to analyze the results of our user testing sessions, I downloaded the Qualtrics survey results as Excel spreadsheets and summarized the issues that our testers found on all resources into a one-page summary for each resource. In order to prioritize the most critical issues in our communications with vendors about their resources, we developed a metric in order to specify which resources saw the most issues. So some resources saw the same issue, or some issues appeared across multiple resources. And this was a frequent problem, such as color contrast issues. And some issues were less common across platforms, such as keyboard navigation problems, for instance. So resources with more issues, especially more issues that were uncommon, were marked as being more severe. So we ranked each resource on a scale of 1 to 3, depending on these factors, so that we could prioritize how we communicated to our vendors about them. In some cases, we tested as many as 21 databases owned by a single vendor. So having this 1 to 3 severity ranking is helping us to prioritize which databases we discuss with them first and most prominently. This is an example of one of the one-page summaries that we developed for each resource. It's a table that summarizes our testers' findings. The left column, criteria, lists the type of accessibility issues that our testers were auditing, and the right column, specific issues, lists the detailed notes that our testers made. For example, the top row there, titled Keyboard Navigation, says that one of our testers was unable to tab inside of an embedded PDF on the content page of this resource. And here, content page means the random page that they tested that was not the home page of the database. Some of the consistent issues that we saw across platforms were with screen reader compatibility. So there were some issues that seemed to be consistent across types of screen readers that our testers were using. So this is VoiceOver or NVDA, but it was hard to tell because of our small sample size, whether these issues were specific to the database all of the time or whether these were more user error issues. So as Nora mentioned, we made a training video to help instruct our testers on how to use a screen reader if they're a sighted person trying to evaluate the accessibility features of a web page. And it seems like this may have helped, but it's really hard to tell because of the small sample size of our testers. So in the future, we'll hopefully want to do a little bit of training on using a screen reader as a sighted person performing accessibility tests before we actually start collecting data to ensure the reliability of these screen reader results that we received. So using these one-page snapshots, we were able to draft letters to each vendor explaining in detail these very specific issues that our testers found with their databases. So we took the criteria that we were evaluating on and we mapped these to WCAG 2.0 standards represented in voluntary product accessibility templates, or VPATS. So to walk through the ones that we used, we mapped keyboard navigation to 2.1.1 keyboard. We mapped manual resizing of content to 1.4.4 resize text. We mapped focus indicator to 2.4.7 focus visible. And screen reader compatibility, we found could be mapped to 3 different standards, those being 1.1.1 non-text content, 1.3.1 info and relationships, and 4.1.2 name role value. Color contrast maps to 1.4.3 contrast minimum, and finally, PDF content maps to 1.4.5 images of text. We're currently composing and sending emails to each vendor, listing the very specific issues that our testers found with each database alongside those WCAG standards for that type of issue. In doing this, we're working with our Resource Acquisitions and Management Department to locate vendor contacts and for extra support in making sure that our verbiage is appropriate. We're keeping track of all of these communications by CCing everyone involved. And we also have a shared spreadsheet where we're summarizing the main idea of the responses that we're getting from our vendors. So that way we can, at a glance, take a look and see which vendors have responded to us and more or less the idea of what they responded to us with. This is especially important because the folks in our Resource Acquisitions and Management Department are the ones who ultimately make the purchasing decisions. And so we wanted to be sure that they were involved in this process so that way they could know if one of their vendor contacts was being particularly helpful to us and really communicative, or if they were not particularly responsive or interested in our accessibility audit results. To that end, we discussed a draft of our vendor contact emails with a librarian who has a JD in order to make sure that none of our language was legally binding in any way. So as I mentioned, we're tracking the general responses that our vendors are providing to us and our communications with them in a shared spreadsheet. So that way we have a general idea of who's responded to us and where we are in the process of talking to each vendor. So the next steps for this process are that we're implementing the same technique, except this time on video resources. So that means that we're using LibGuides mapping to determine which resources we want to analyze first. And we're using Qualtrics to walk testers through the audit process, as well as collect their data anonymously. This time for the video resources, the criteria that we're looking at are whether the videos have transcripts, captions, audio descriptions, and sign language translations. On the right-hand part of the slide here, there is a screenshot that is a sample of what the survey looks like to our testers, and this is just happens to be the mobile version. Additional next steps that we have are that we plan to talk with we plan to communicate the results of our audit with our librarians. Our current plan for doing this is that Nora and I will make a LibGuide that will have a page for each type of accessibility criteria that we've audited. So that way our librarians can go into this private LibGuide and get a sense of which resources are particularly good or particularly bad for different accessibility features. For instance, if our librarians are working with a blind patron, then they would be able to go to this LibGuide, go to the screen reader page, and there they can see a list of which resources we found to be particularly good for screen readers and which ones may not be so good for screen readers. So that way the librarian can direct the patron to the resources that would be most useful for them. We're also still working through emailing all of these vendors. As Nora mentioned, we audited the template. We audited as many as 80 resources. And so we have to email 80 different vendors we have to email out the vendors of these 80 resources. And we're still working through sending out initial emails in some cases, but in other cases, we're working through replying to these vendors and schedule times to meet with them or clarify certain results that we provided for them, etc. For instance, one of the resources that we communicated our results to has actually upgraded or redone their entire interface in the time since we have audited their site. So our results were no longer particularly useful to them. So what we've decided to do is that Nora and I ourselves will go back and audit their new interface and provide them hopefully useful results again. The takeaways that we hope you leave this presentation with are that evaluating electronic resources for accessibility is a way to give remote workers productive tasks with a relatively low startup time. Also, we have found that Qualtrics is a useful data collection tool for usability testing. It's been especially helpful as well for walking our participants through the process of doing these tests in the case that they're not familiar with what accessibility is to begin with. So Qualtrics has been helpful since the survey because of the survey format, so we can walk participants through the process while also collecting their results. And finally, it seems to us so far that vendors seem to be receptive to feedback about their resources accessibility features. And what's been the most helpful is very specific documentation of issues that our users found on specific pages and what exactly we are hoping that they could work on. So here we have linked some of the resources that we have created in our process. These are again available through the short link that we provided, which is again go.unc.edu/accessaudit. These include a template of the testing survey that we use, a list of the accessibility testing tools that we went through that our testers have been using to evaluate these web pages, and a sample contact lender for that demonstrates the wording we've been using to communicate with our vendors. So we have intentionally tried to keep the content of our presentation a bit short because we wanted to update you on what progress has been made in recent weeks and the days since we've completed this, creating these slides. And we also hope to leave some extra time for questions because we really want this process to be useful to other departments or institutions who might want to replicate this accessibility audit process for their own purposes. And so we're hoping to help anyone who has questions about our methods or replicating them in any way.
We also encourage you, if you would like, or if you have any questions about this presentation that may be more in depth, please feel free to reach out to us via email. We are both still kind of learning and evolving through this process as we go. So we are happy to provide our perspectives or feedback on any accessibility projects that you're working on, knowing that we are probably going to get ideas from those as well. So we'll go ahead and open this up for questions now.
I would like to start off with my own question.
Mhm.
And that is, this is a really impressive way to provide work for remote employees. And I'm just wondering, how long did it take you to package this for employee participation?
That's a great question. This was actually one of my first projects at UNC-Chapel Hill. I was hired on March 16th, and my supervisor asked me to create a work from home project, and this was basically what I came up with. It took probably about 2 weeks to create the actual survey. Things that I would have changed in retrospect: I wish that I had done the mapping of our criteria to VPAT criteria prior to creating the survey. As it happened, I had just selected accessibility criteria that I knew was easy to test for. And then we had to go in after the fact and kind of map those criteria to standardized criteria that vendors would be familiar with from their VPATs. So I'd say probably about 2 weeks to create the survey, about a week to recruit people, which was, again, pretty simple because UNC libraries had a very clear-cut way of signaling that you had a project that was available, and then people would just be matched to it. I'd say about a month after the initial request for a work from home project was when we finally started getting people into the surveys and doing the actual auditing. It did take a decent amount of time to identify the databases that we wanted to evaluate. We excluded any database that were not subscription resources because we wanted any feedback that we provided to vendors to have some leverage behind it, meaning that we would be able to semi-threaten to pull our purchasing if they didn't remediate these accessibility issues, which is not the leverage that we would have with a free resource like ERIC or PubMed. So I would say probably about a month to package it all. And then we got more participants as time went on. We released a series of 10 general surveys for accessibility resource testing with 8 resources per survey.
Thank you. While we're still working, many of us from home, do you foresee a redo of this project? Or
I think that this is something that we've done kind of the meat of the work on at this point, that we will continue to update. As Felicity mentioned, we're working on developing a LibGuide for subject librarians so that they can identify the databases that are most accessible for the users that have needs that they're aware of. Those will need to be refreshed and updated over time as vendors make changes to their products. However, at this point, as people are getting back into physical workspaces, as people are kind of finding their feet in this digital workplace, I feel like those updates may be done more as a spot check than as a mass testing. We basically wanted to make sure that we could provide our subject librarians with the ability to serve the users that they need to serve, and to do so in an empowered and knowledgeable fashion. So now that we have the basis of that done, we will continue to do this type of testing and to communicate with our vendors, but I doubt that it will be done on quite such a broad scale with as many participants.
thank you.
Thank you.
And I do want to point out that we will provide these slides later to attendees, so you will have access to them and the many links and other information in here. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I'm thinking that we can wrap this up. I want to thank Nora and Felicity for this excellent presentation, and I want to thank everyone who attended. Please join us for session 2, which will begin at 12:15.
All right. Thanks
Thank you.
everybody for attending.
Bye, everybody.